Swanson. It is the sister ship of the Cinepot. So 2 boats built around the same era and the same design, both uniquely designed for these lakes. We are on St. Mary Lake. St. Mary Lake is the second largest lake here in the park, second only to Lake McDonald. So St. Mary Lake is 9 miles in length, ranges anywhere from a mile to a quarter mile in width, a mile at its widest and a quarter mile at its narrowest. We are coming up on that narrowest part of the lake, and cleverly it is called the Narrows. The lake averages about 300 feet in depth. Was carved out by glaciers during the Ice Age, so if you can imagine this whole valley that we're going through right here, it's kind of like a bathtub that was filled with one giant glacier. Lighter color rock. It's made up of Molten Limestone. So Molten Limestone is different from most of the rock we have here in the park, which is mostly mudstone. That Molten Limestone is really durable and resistant, so when the glaciers were moving through here, they had a tough time eroding away at that limestone. Limestone does date back 1.5 billion years, some of the oldest exposed rock on the planet. Feet into the bottom of the lake, kind of in the shape of a candlestick. And there is a story about how Wild Goose Island got its name, if you guys are interested in hearing it. Yes, we are. Good. Alright, so this is kind of a Romeo and Juliet tale. But basically, if you go back a few hundred years, before this was really considered America, there were 2 main tribes that lived in this area. We had the Kootenai, who lived off to the west side of the continent. Meeting up with a Blackfoot warrior, and they fell in love immediately. And there's kind of love that wasn't supposed to be, because their tribes obviously didn't like each other. But they fell in love, and they came out in secrecy to Wild Goose Island once a month underneath the light of the full moon. So they'd come out here once a month, and they do this for years, and it was going fine, and then eventually they got tired of this. They got tired of living a life of secrecy, and they felt like they had been lying and betraying their families. So they had enough of it, and as some sort of offering or a sacrifice, they decided to jump hand in hand into the icy cold waters of St. Mary Lake. And as they're drowning, and they're bringing in their final breaths of air, the Creator took pity upon their souls, and He turned them into wild geese, so they could fly away and nest and live together for the rest of their lives. They've been known to return to the shores of Wild Goose Island to nest every spring. Now, I've only seen one goose on Wild Goose Island, so it's possible that he got stood up. unfortunately, a few horses did die in the construction of the road. And when the horses died, they were actually thrown over this cliff. So in the 1920s, there were, the St. Mary's steamer was operating on this lake, giving tours just like the tour that you're seeing today. And they would guarantee grizzly bear sightings right here because the grizzlies would be there eating the horses. So no longer do we guarantee grizzly bear sightings, and we do not throw horses over cliffs anymore. Stretched all the way through Idaho into Washington, up into British Columbia and Alberta. And so that sea deposited a lot of the minerals that we see here today. So when you look up at the mountains and you see these flat lines, those are layers of sediment that got deposited over time. So the red rock and that gray rock are actually the same rock. They're both mudstone called argillite. That red rock is actually a little bit older because it was deposited first when the sea was much shallower. And that shallower sea had a lot more oxygen present in it. So that oxygen reacted with the minerals in the sediment and caused oxidation, also known as rust. So essentially you're looking at rusted rocks. And then that gray rock was deposited later when the sea got much deeper. The sea got a lot deeper and there was less oxygen present at the bottom where the minerals were. So they didn't oxidize, they didn't break down and turn into that red color. So it is the same rock, but that red rock is older. And then a lot of these mountains got here through plate tectonic forces. If you can imagine, about 700 million years ago, most of these mountains that you see today would have actually been about 50 miles west of here, 60 miles west of here, and then they were part of the Pacific Plate. Slowly the Pacific Plate traveled at about 2-4 inches a year, something like that, very slow. But you spread that out over millions of years and it'll add up. And so we have the Pacific Plate going underneath the North American Plate, causing some uplift and some mountains. But then it also, there was a thrust fault where a chunk of that Pacific Plate broke off and started to slide along the top of the North American Plate. So if you've driven into the park from the east side of the park, you've noticed over in East Glacier, and people came into the park in the early 1900s looking for copper, silver, gold. They didn't really find anything because it's all that mudstone that I was just talking about. There's nothing here. But there are beautiful mountains, and so a lot of people were traveling to the Swiss Alps because they wanted to see He was known to be a little bit of a wild partier. He would throw lavish parties. He'd invite actors and artists from Hollywood and all around. They'd come out here, and it was known that their parties would be so loud that they would actually wake up visitors on Sun Point. So the visitors on Sun Point would complain to the park rangers. The rangers would have to come over here in their boat and tell Louis Hill to be quiet. But, you know, his father owned the Great Northern Railway, so he kind of had a lot of money, and he kind of got away with whatever he wanted to. So he built this cabin, threw his parties, and then around World War II, they came back and they found that his cabin was also in disrepair. It was also falling apart. So they wanted to tear it down. And as they're tearing it down, they looked in the historic archives and they realized that his cabin was actually old enough to be a National Historic Landmark. So, on our left, you look, you'll see kind of a grassy little hill, and you'll see a big pile of lumber. That is the location of Louis Hill's old cabin, and it is Glacier National Park's only National Historic rotting pile of lumber. In the Atlantic Ocean. So we will be docking here in just a matter of minutes. So I'm going to ask that everyone remain seated for the rest of the ride until we get to the dock. Once we get to the other side, you got one or two options. You can get off the boat and you can hike to Bering Falls. It's a real easy hike. It's about 100 yards flat. Not too difficult. You'll get off the dock. There's a trail, and you're walking on that trail to the right. You walk about 100 yards, and there you are at Bering Falls. It's a nice waterfall. And if you're not feeling too much like getting out of the boat and going off to the waterfall, you can feel free to stay on the boat. I'll be here. You can hang out with me. It's perfectly fine. But we'll be docking in just a second here. There's a few different trails you can use to get to this. And I believe it's actually called the St. Mary Trailhead. And it's just a few miles past where our boat dock is.
Let me ask it a different way. There's a trail from one of the docks, right?
This dock.
Oh, this is the one.